So I think we can pretty much all agree that the internet is a great place to learn a bunch of new skills. And if you're a filmmaker or a photographer, chances are a lot of what you know today, you've probably learned somewhere online. Point is, there's a lot of great tips and tricks just floating around out there that you can take and apply to your work and then eventually turn into habits that you keep using in the future. The thing is, along with all of the super useful and good information, there are a bunch of tips and tricks that are pretty bad out there as well. And so I wanted to make a quick video talking about exactly those bad tips and tricks that I personally believe you should learn to ignore if you want to be a better filmmaker or photographer. And unfortunately, the way I know that they're bad and they should be avoided is because I've basically followed all of them at one point or another, and I've had to find out the hard way that they usually just end up getting in your way instead of helping. So I want to try and save you some of the trouble of following bad advice that then turns into habits, because at one point you're going to realize that there's a lot of stuff that you need to unlearn if you want to become a better creator. So the first bad tip that a lot of people are going to give you is to, whatever you do, always avoid shooting in harsh light. I'm pretty sure we've all heard the tip that you're always supposed to try and shoot during golden hour because that's when the light is best. I just want to say that last part of the tip I completely agree with. The light during golden hour can absolutely get you some beautiful images, whether it's for photo or video, but it doesn't mean that it's the only time of day you should be shooting. This might come as a shock to some of you, but life keeps going on throughout basically all hours of the day. So by just choosing to only shoot during the short periods of time during sunrise or sunset, you're kind of really limiting yourself. And yeah, maybe with shooting harsh light, you have to learn how to, use diffusion and use light modifiers using filters. You also have to get used to working around sharp shadows and high contrast scenes, but that's pretty much a good thing in my opinion. On one hand, you're gonna have a reason to go out and learn a bunch of new useful stuff, which is always a good thing, and on the other hand, you're not gonna just be sitting around wasting your time waiting for the light to be just right for you to go out and shoot. It's gonna give you a lot more creative freedom, and it's gonna be one less excuse stopping you from just going out and creating something cool. Trust me, there are so many amazing creators that have made amazing work in what people would usually consider to be terrible lighting conditions just because they understand how to work with all of the limitations and all of the disadvantages of harsh light. So if they can do it, you can probably do it as well. The second tip you should probably ignore is shooting absolutely everything vertically. And this tip is usually going to come from people that exclusively post most of their stuff on social media. And for that reason, I kind of get it, because, obviously most of the social media platforms where we post our work for others to see are kind of optimized for vertical scrolling. And so in that way, it kind of makes sense. The reason why I think that's a bad tip to follow and a bad habit to have is because that way you're taking away a lot of your flexibility of what you can use your images or video for after the fact. Not only that, but we pretty much see the world in a horizontal aspect ratio. And I realize that sounds really stupid when I say it like that, but it's true. When you think about it, like, we as humans, if we don't move our heads, we see a lot more on the sides of our vision than we see up and down. And so when you're taking a photo or a video vertically, you're not really capturing the scene like another person standing next to you would see it. You're cutting off a bunch of stuff from the sides, and so it changes the way that the final result looks, and so it might not look as good as it did when you were there in person. Shooting horizontally gives you the freedom to, down the line, if you decide to print out some of your photos in a horizontal orientation, or if you want to use your images or video for platforms that aren't vertically focused, like maybe if you want to use it as a banner on a website or a thumbnail for your YouTube video. Obviously, I'm not telling you to completely ditch vertical shooting, just don't do it all the time. Of course, if there's like a subject in your frame that doesn't fit horizontally, just turn your camera and snap a photo. Or if you're taking photos or videos just to have memories with friends, then obviously it's completely fine and it doesn't matter. But the point is, not everything has to be vertical just because social media is. The third tip you should ignore is specifically for the filmmakers out there, and it's people telling you to always film in the highest available frame rate and then slow down whatever you want to in post. I made a full video about this topic that you can go and check out on my channel after this one, but basically you want to avoid this piece of advice because it's gonna affect the way that your motion blur is displayed relative to the frame rate that you're delivering in. And also it's going to cause audio sync issues for clips where you were capturing audio on location and you need to use it in the edit. From all of my years as a video editor, I can definitely tell you that it stands out when a video was entirely filmed in a higher frame rate and it's either like a completely slow motion video throughout the whole thing, or it's just a bunch of slow motion clips that were brought back up to real-time speed. So if you don't want to be one of those people that stands out as an amateur because you clearly don't know how and why different frame rates are used, I would suggest that you kind of ignore this piece of advice when somebody's giving it to you and just go ahead and learn how to do things the correct way, which, like I said, if you want to do it, I got a video on my channel, so you can go and watch it after this one. The fourth tip you should definitely ignore is absolutely always shooting wide open on any lens. There are people that are gonna get like a lens that opens up to f1.4 or f1.2 and they're not gonna shut up about how it's the best experience in their entire life shooting wide open. And then those exact same people are gonna tell you that you should also be doing it and they're gonna look at you weird when you choose not to. Thing is, the widest aperture on the lens isn't the one you always want to be using because it has a bunch of drawbacks to it. There are technical things like how thin your plane of focus is, chromatic aberration and sharpness, and a bunch of other technical stuff that you can go and watch somebody else's video on if you care about that stuff. And then there's the fact that sometimes when you're shooting a specific subject, depending on how you've got everything set up, shooting at the widest possible aperture is basically going to turn your background into mush. So think about it this way: whenever your aperture is at its lowest number, the background is going to be more out of focus, and if the aperture is at a higher number, the more of the background is going to be in focus. A lot of people think that having a blurry background can be a really cool effect, and it absolutely can be, but there's a time and a place for it. You know, you've gone through all of this location scouting and planning to figure out how your subject is going to look the best in the environment around them. The last thing you want to do is blur your background so much that none of your planning even matters in the first place. Obviously, there's going to be situations where you would benefit from shooting at the widest possible aperture, like if you're shooting in low light and you just need more light to be hitting your sensor, or if you want to separate your subject from their background and the background itself doesn't really matter. But the point is, you should get used to using all sorts of different apertures and not just the widest one that's available to you. The last tip you should ignore is something that's pretty common on social media, and it's actually more of like a general category of tips that people are going to give you about camera settings. I'm talking about the type of tips where somebody's gonna give out a bunch of like the settings that they use to make a photo or a video, and they're gonna tell you that if you also use those settings, you're gonna get the same result, as if it's like a one-size-fits-all solution. But that's obviously not the case, because there's a lot more than just camera settings that goes into getting a specific result. And so, you know, you use those settings that they've given you, and then when your image turns out looking like crap, you start feeling upset and angry at yourself because you think you're doing something wrong. Or, for example, it's like the tip that people constantly give you to always underexpose your image because recovering highlights is way harder than recovering shadows, which is true, but like, if your highlights don't have any information for you to recover, it doesn't matter, so that doesn't make sense. So when it comes to all of these tips that people give you about camera settings, I would say just ignore them and take the time to like learn how your camera works and what settings you actually need for different situations, and trust me, it's gonna end up making you way better of a creator. So maybe this video was kind of like a wake-up call to some of you. Like I said, I've had the unfortunate pleasure of following basically all of these tips at one point or another, and I can confidently tell you that learning to ignore them and not use them anymore has been really helpful to me as a creator, and I hope that this video could help some of you out as well. If you enjoyed it, feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you want to stick around, and if you got the time, you can go ahead and drop me a comment with some other bad filmmaking or photography related tips that you think we as creators would benefit from ignoring. That being said, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next one.